Thank you, Madam Speaker. On October 6th, I asked this government if it would ban the destructive practice of gas fracking in Canada. In his response to my question, the Minister of the Environment stated that the government will exceed its 2030 emissions targets. It's important to point out that the current 2030 targets are woefully inadequate. Exceeding a target that is too low is not a win, it's a failure. The minister also stated that the government has introduced regulations to reduce methane emissions. I appreciate the acknowledgement that the federal government has a role in regulating the extractive practices of the energy industry. This is especially true when those practices poison aquifers and airsheds and release climate-destroying pollutants into the atmosphere. Fracking is a process for extracting methane that cannot be controlled. Reducing methane emissions at the wellhead does not make fracking a safe and acceptable practice. Fracking leaks toxic chemicals into aquifers and groundwater, releases pollutants into airsheds, releases methane into the atmosphere, and increases seismic activity and earthquakes. Methane is not a transition fuel. It is a climate change accelerator. When methane is leaked into the atmosphere for the first 20 years, it is 80 times more potent as a greenhouse gas than CO2. The practice of fracking poses a direct and immediate threat to our future and the future of our children and grandchildren. Using chemical fingerprints, researchers have linked a significant spike in methane emissions to the boom in shale and oil gas fracking. This spike is linked to the accelerated pace of climate change. An estimated 30 million abandoned oil and gas wells around the world are leaking methane. Methane leaks represent as much of a threat to climate change as burning coal to generate electricity. The provinces aren't talking about new coal plants. Why are they so fired up about gas fracking? Many jurisdictions that are serious about climate change are banning fracking and the installation of natural gas in new neighborhoods and buildings. They know that methane is a climate killer. After climate change, water and air pollution represents the biggest threat to human health from fracking. Fracking uses huge amounts of water and creates massive amounts of toxic wastewater. People who live near fracking operations have had their wells poisoned, leading to increased disease in humans and animals. Fracking releases poisonous hydrocarbons into airsheds, representing another serious health threat. Fracking has been shown to increase earthquakes. In Northwest BC, fracking in the vicinity of dams on the Peace River is putting the integrity of those dams at risk. The increased seismic activity could lead to catastrophic failure of the WAC Bennett Dam, the Peace Canyon Dam, and it threatens the integrity of the Site C Dam, which is under construction on geologically unstable ground. Ironically, the Site C Dam is being built to provide cheap, subsidized power to the fracking industry and the LNG industry, which, if continued, could lead to the failure of that dam or a cascading failure of the dams upstream. Ideally, we should have legislation that regulates against illogical decisions, such as building a dam in a geologically unstable area to support an industry that causes earthquakes. But you can't regulate for common sense. Any government that is serious about arresting climate change and protecting the health of citizens would ban fracking. Thank you.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Environment and Climate Change.
Merci beaucoup, Madame la.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you for the question.
Methane is a potent greenhouse gas. We also know that taking action on methane emissions is one of the lowest cost actions to reduce greenhouse gases. And with this in mind, and with the understanding that regulation of shale gas production is mainly a provincial territorial responsibility, we've worked together with provinces and industry to finalize national methane regulations. These regulations came into force on January 1st, 2020, and require resource developers to eliminate temporary venting during well completions after hydraulic fracturing operations. On Canada's emissions, Madam Speaker, we're making important progress. In December, the Government of Canada announced a commitment to exceed Canada's 2030 emissions reduction targets and chart the path towards achieving net zero emissions, Madam Speaker, by 2050. Canada's most recent national report on climate change progress to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, the fourth biennial report, demonstrates that the government has made excellent progress in implementing Canada's National Climate Plan, the Pan-Canadian Framework. For example, this report predicts in 2030, Canada's GHG emissions will be 227 million tons below what was projected in 2015. This is a historic level of emissions reductions, Madam Speaker. And our energy sector is a significant contributor to our national economy. In light of this and the challenging economic circumstances facing the sector and the regional economies dependent on it, the Government of Canada is providing funding to sustain workers in the energy sector while cleaning up the environment. This includes up to $1 billion to the Government of Alberta to support the province's work to clean up inactive oil and gas wells across the province. Up to $400 million to the Government of Saskatchewan to support work to clean up orphan and inactive wells across the province. Up to $120 million to the Government of British Columbia to support work to clean up orphan and inactive oil and gas wells across the province as well, and $200 million to Alberta to ensure that the Orphan Wells Association is well funded to support its work to clean up an orphan well and gas well sites across Alberta. The OWA will fully repay this amount, Madam Speaker. Donc, Madame la Présidente, agir sur le changement.
Madam Speaker, taking action on climate change, it doesn't mean immediately shutting down the energy sector in Canada, but instead developing natural resources in Canada in a sustainable, responsible way and protecting workers with key green investments.
Member for Nanaimo, Ladysmith.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The methane budget is spent. We have already released too much of it into the atmosphere, and we must act now to stop these emissions, not just lower them. For all the reasons I have outlined, many jurisdictions around the world have either placed moratoriums on fracking or banned it outright, including France, Germany, Bulgaria, Scotland, the United Kingdom, Tunisia, New York State, the Vermont State, and the list keeps growing. The idea that exporting frack gas to China will help them lower emissions has been exposed as an outright lie. When will this government study the research and stop supporting this fallacy? It's time to ban fracking because the only thing we should be accelerating is our transition to renewable energy. Our children and our grandchildren deserve nothing less.
Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Methane regulations will help protect the health of Canadians by improving the air we breathe. Emissions of harmful cancer-causing air toxins and smog-forming pollutants that are often found with methane emissions will be reduced. Common air pollutants emitted from oil and gas production are volatile organic compounds, which are linked to a variety of serious public health effects, including lung problems, asthma attacks, and early death from respiratory and cardiovascular complications. And that's why, Madam Speaker, we're taking action.
The